Hello everyone, this is POW Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be going over the timing and impacts on the major snowstorm and ice storm. Welcome back everyone, how's it going? Happy Saturday out there. Let's go ahead and take a pause and hit the like button. If you hadn't subscribed to my channel already, I do daily updates. It's easy to do. You just hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to get all my timely updates on the upcoming events ahead. I do an update essentially every single morning. It's also important to share this video as well to let them know on what's to come. So let's kind of break this down on what's happening this morning. Here's the overall radar depiction of our snowstorm that impacted the upper Midwest. Now that's diving southward into portions of Kansas City this morning, into St. Louis with some snow. Now it's filtering into Springfield with rain on the south side, but you can see the plunging temperatures and the wind is really whipping outside if you're in this part of the country in Oklahoma and into Texas, but it's down to 36 in Dallas, and that is just what's to come of our snowstorm that's continuing to dive southward, and then it's going to pivot east and then head up northeast. So let's go over the overall setup of some of the snow amounts that's taken place so far. So these amounts have for sure verified in the Iowa area, this orange shaded area. That is your 8 to 12 inch snow swath. And this darker shaded orange, that is actually over a foot of snow. And these lighter shades of blues here from the Dakotas all the way down into St. Louis. This is the latest advisory and update of the snow amounts from the National Weather Service through 6 o'clock this morning, with several inches of snow within these blue shaded areas. And it's still continuing to snow, and it's diving south. And we've got new watches and warnings taking place. Look at the Christmas tree really lighting up. We've got all those brown shaded areas. That's your high wind watches and warnings. I know the cold front came to about midnight last night. They had a 55-mile-per-hour wind gust in the DFW Metroplex, and those winds are continuing to whip into Oklahoma and much of Texas. There's all the purples. That is your winter weather advisory and winter storm warnings into the pink shaded areas. And we've got new watches and warnings up the coast here in and around northern Mississippi, much of Tennessee. You can actually see this kind of a knoll area of kind of a warm nose area where they won't be getting much essentially. But yeah, some of those high winds of anywhere from 40 to 50 to 55 miles an hour are still going to be impacting much of Alabama, getting into Georgia, even the northern panhandle of Florida. And that's a ice storm warning out here in South Carolina. And then winter storm warnings in much of South Carolina and North Carolina, as well as Virginia. And then we've got new winter storm watches up the coast here to Kentucky, southern Ohio, into West Virginia, getting into towards the Pennsylvania area, as well as upstate New York, as well as Vermont, New Hampshire, and to Maine. But notice the lull around the coast, and we're going to be explaining why that is in full details. Let's go over the overall setup on the HRRR model. This is the latest high-resolution guidance. If you can follow along, here's the overall timing depiction. 18Z's right around 12 o'clock this afternoon. And here's the simulation of the rain, sleet, and snow of what's going to be falling out of the sky. We've got that snow by noontime in and around the southern Missouri area, eventually filtering into northern Arkansas, getting into portions of eastern Oklahoma with that rain and that secondary low developing on the south side. But that snow is continuing to take a beeline down. And as we get into the afternoon hours, this is about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock this evening, notice the little blue flakes in and around the Dallas-Worth area. Yeah, you could be looking at some dusting of snow anywhere from northeast Texas, probably some flurries in and around the Metroplex, especially the east of the I-35 corridor. Eastward with some snow flurries out of the sky, not any impacts whatsoever, but it might be nice to see a little snow that might be little flakes that might be flying out of the sky here. But there's all the rain to the south side as we almost take a kind of a new storm. So this has been a kind of a tricky storm to forecast, because essentially it's been about 3 separate storms. We got that initial storm that's diving southward. Now we're going to be starting the initiation of our second storm that's going to be pivoting eastward. And then we have our third phase of the storm that's going to be pivoting northeastward up into the mid-Atlantic and the northeast. So let's go over some of the timing and details of that. So here's the overall setup of the HRRR model and the full depiction on the eastward view. Yeah, look at the rain starting to come down into the southern features because we've got that warm sector. We lost the cold air push, right? So we get the warm south where wind. That's been the most challenging part with the storm, with the cold push from the north. We should see some changeover to that snow, especially in and around the Tennessee area, getting into northern portions of Mississippi here and extreme northern portions of Alabama as this continues to take a shift off to the east. And that's where it gets really damaging with some ice really starting to take shape as we kind of get those warmer air aloft and the cold air continuing to press from that cold air damming setup. That's the ice warning threat into South Carolina and to North Carolina, and then snow on the north side as this continues to push to the east. And as it gets a little bit further off to the east, notice this developing high pressure, right? That's going to be really prevalent on the storm's path going ahead. So we're starting to get more guidance of, hey, the trick and when's the pivot point from this particular system, and what's it gonna be? Who's gonna get the rain? Who's gonna get the snow? Well, this high pressure is pretty strong. It's a really high pressure gradient, and that's going to continue to push further off into the west. And as it pushes, it helps push this storm a little bit further off into the west as well. So you've got some of the warmer winds filtering in from the south, and then you got that push of the high pressure gradient off to the east here. And that's going to influence the steering mechanisms from our particular snowstorm as this continues to come up the coast. We do have some backside snow. So we've got the backside snow impacting Middle Tennessee. Some of these totals could be fairly impressive. Going up to Middle Tennessee, going into portions of Kentucky here. That filters into northern Alabama and then northern Georgia. I do feel even Atlanta starts getting into the mix of some snow. They're actually under a winter weather advisory of some possibly 1 to 3 inches as it drops further off to the south. But I think that's where it stops, because then it lifts back northward and creates our third phase of the storm. And that's where it's going to be deeply influenced by this ridge of high pressure that's going to be steering this kind of away from the coastline here. So as this comes up, it's more of a mid-Atlantic snowstorm as this continues to press upward, and that's when it starts to really get cranking with some very heavy snow with a lot of precipitation filtering in from the south. Much of this along the coast is going to be in the form of rain in and around the I-95 corridor. We are going to be seeing some snow, but it's not going to be really amounting to much totals, maybe an inch or two along the coastline here. Most of this is going to be falling in the liquid precipitation. But as you go inland, that's where we can start seeing some pretty impressive snow amounts as we get into portions of West Virginia. The snow is going to be flying definitely into central and southern Ohio with some pretty impressive totals for them. That gets in and around the Cleveland area eventually, and then especially into Pittsburgh, where they could be clocked with this system. Getting into central PA, going into upstate New York, getting into northern parts of Jersey here. Yeah, some dusting or two in and around the Long Island area, and portions as you transfer to snow into the interior regions, as you get into Connecticut here, going into Massachusetts, as this continues to ride up the coast. Here's the latest guidance from the HRRR model. Again, it only goes out 48 hours, so I kind of like to use this because it's the most true, newest, outlook, and I kind of waited to do this video to give you the newest, freshest data that's available to us. There's the snow that continues to fly, and the swath of where it's going to take with those 1 to 2 inches, or 2 to 4 inch band into southern Missouri here, northern Arkansas. Yeah, dusting or two northeast of Texas. There's eastern Oklahoma with 1 inch of snow. You could filter as far south as Shreveport, like I mentioned in yesterday's video. Bunch of Arkansas sea snow from this. I do feel that. Northern Mississippi, northern Alabama, and then you got northern Georgia, right? So those are your most little bit higher totals, and it creeps down into central, central Mississippi. Yeah, Birmingham, Alabama could be seeing maybe a dusting half inch from this particular system. But again, that's about as far south as it gets. They did include Atlanta into the winter weather advisory from this system, because look at the borderline. That's kind of where it stops. So that 1 to 3 inch swath in northern parts of South Carolina, much of North Carolina, where you are going to get the initial phase of the snow, but then it's rapidly going to change with that sleet and ice, and just kind of a sloppy mix of ice, and it's going to be very treacherous travel and around this neck of the woods with that glaze to a tenth to quarter to a half inch. And we'll go over some of these ice totals. So it's going to be really difficult to drive in this neck of the woods, especially as you get into eastern parts of Tennessee, eastern parts of Kentucky, parts of South Carolina, North Carolina, into Virginia, up the coast here into West Virginia. This whole area is going to be very difficult to travel on with that coating of ice that's going to be on the road, compounding on the snow. But look at the gradient in southern Ohio with those heavier totals. And there's a kind of a bullseye into and around central PA and northern PA, where, yeah, a good 8 to 12 inch swath, a foot totals, 12 to 18 inches is definitely not out of the question. Even isolated spots, again, I'm thinking even upwards to 2 feet is definitely not out of the question, especially as you get towards the lakes, and the more of a lake enhanced inducement of this particular snow event as this continues to ride up the coast. But yeah, along the coastline here, I'm not really technically expecting much from this system, maybe 1 to 2 inches. This is going to be an inland event with the influence of that high pressure taking on that third phase of the snowstorm, that we're starting to get better, feeling of the actual track of this system. And it's been a unique track. It's dive southward, it's going to pivot east, and then it's going to head up northeast. So it's been very difficult to time the pivot point and exactly where that transition is going to take place, with timing and influences of vorticities and high pressures, right? So that's why this storm has been fairly difficult to kind of forecast, because it's essentially 3 storms into one. If it was just one storm, like, we pretty much nailed the central part of the storm, right? But the timing and placement of that transition has been very difficult, in exactly where it's going to pivot and where it's going to come up with the influence of that warm nose and that southern wind that's coming up from the south. And you got that cold air damming, and then the influence of the high pressure. So there's a lot of moving parts with these weather events going over a huge real estate of the country, the good swath of the eastern 2/3 of the country. But yeah, look, we're getting starting to get some newest guidance on the preliminary ice amounts of what could take place. And again, anywhere really over 1/8 of an inch, I mean, you can't really drive on that stuff, right? So as you get a little bit higher, that's when you start getting that coating on the trees, and you start getting tree damage. You start getting into the half-inch range, that's where it starts getting down power lines, because those things get so heavy and they start to cripple down. So that's where it gets really dangerous. So yeah, we could be looking at some of those areas that could see upwards to those half-inch totals in and around southern Greenville here, Rock Hill about a half inch, Columbia about a 1/4 of an inch. There's into Florence, going into Fayetteville, almost a quarter inch. As we swing up, there's Charlotte, a 1/4 of an inch. Raleigh about a 1/4 of an inch, Greensboro again 1/4 to a half inch. This is all dangerous stuff. This is more or less a damaging ice storm that's taken place with probably, unfortunately, some power outages, some tree damage, and power lines coming down in this neck of the woods. But look at the swath. Pikeville, 1/10 of an inch here. Again, anything over 1/8 of an inch, 1/10 of an inch, that's that ice on the road. And then, with the snow compounding onto that, it's just going to be really difficult to travel in this neck of the woods. Even up to DC and to Harrisburg, you're still getting the ice from this particular event, with the newer rain coming in and that swath coming in from that transferring over to the ice. Baltimore, again, 1/10 of an inch. York, 1/10 of an inch. Going to South Bel Air, a 1/10 of an inch. So it's a good chunk of real estate that's going to be impacted from ice from this particular setup. Now let's take you back at the latest 3K kilometer. That only goes out 60 hours, and this is the latest guidance. Again, this is the brand new run that just finished updating before I did this video, and there's the new fresh look. Again, with that extreme amount of moisture coming in from the south, that's a lot of precipitation, but most of this is going to be in the form of rain, with 1 to 2 inches of rain coming up for most of Jersey into Delaware, into Long Island. You know, along the coast here, we're going to transfer to some of that ice, but then you have snow to the north and then snow on the backside. So there's your heavier snow into southern Ohio there, getting into West Virginia, going into upstate New York. That's going into that. This is the midnight time frame on Sunday. Going into Connecticut here, portions of Rhode Island, and then as well as Massachusetts getting into the action from that snow, but that continues to lift northward, right? So you got that warm air continuing to push. You got that high pressure pushing in. That's going to continue with the rain along the coast, with the snow to the north, into Vermont and New Hampshire. This will eventually get into Maine, and then you get that backside effect with the snow. So you're going to have a punch in the beginning, and then you have that backside effect, and that's where you can have some pretty significant totals with the lake enhanced inducement, and then backside moisture coming in on the backside. That's around as you wake up on 6 o'clock in the morning on Monday morning time frame, and this continues to push and lift up into the 10 o'clock noontime hour, where these backside snow amounts could be pretty healthy as well, adding to those totals and to portions of Pennsylvania here, going into New York, especially along the coast here with that lake enhanced inducement. And there's your snow creeping into Maine by now, with that heavier snow filtering in, especially on the northern side. And then all this by Monday night going into Tuesday, it starts to wind down. You still get the northwest flow coming in, but you start to the wind down effect from these snow totals. Here's the latest 3K snowfall totals. Kind of gives you a different depiction. Some of the totals around Middle Tennessee, going up the coast. You've got that dusting 1 to 2 inches along the coastline here. Your more significant totals are more or less inland, especially as you get into PA, portions of West Virginia, going into upstate New York. This is kind of a bullseye of where you could be looking at the most significant snowfall totals of a good 8 to 12 inch swath. Areas 12 to 18, probably isolated areas, out of the question. 2 feet amount is probably not out of the question with these dynamics and all that extreme amount of moisture in the atmosphere. There's your overall wind threat as well. So you got your high winds as well. This wind's going to be cranking. That's why we got all those high wind watches and warnings and those new high wind watches. So this whole area, as it continues to fall with that low pressure, it's going to be very high winds as it travels along its path as well. Those 40, 50, upwards to 60 mile per hour. And again, if you live right along the coast, some of these areas could be going up, gusting up to hurricane force. Wind gusts is definitely not out of the question, but there's your liquid, right? So that's a lot of moisture with this storm, where it's going to be falling into rain. And I showed you the preliminary amounts on the sleet, or the freezing rain, and then you got the sleet, and then there's some of the snow. So yeah, I mean, some of these totals, especially along the coast, there's your 1 to 2 inches. But yeah, when you start getting inland, most of this is going to be falling into the form of snow. As it falls. And there's your latest European swath of the outlook, kind of a more of a longer range outlook between now and Tuesday of those preliminary totals. And then you got the latest GFS as well. Again, the conglomerate through with the high pressure building in from pushes that higher pressure gradient with those higher totals well inland with that good 8 to 12, and there's your higher amounts of 15, 18, upwards to possibly 2 feet in and along the lake effect induced snow areas. But the rest of the country, it's fairly dry. I think the northwest, the atmospheric river kind of dies down. You got a pretty good swath of high pressure building in, higher than average temperatures out west, and then dry too, with complements of the La Nina really starting to take hold. But going forward, I think the majority of what's ahead for really the rest of January, guys, is predominantly higher than average temperatures out west, And there's the B line with basically a conveyor belt of systems coming in with one after another on the eastern corridor of the US with these, very cold air filtering in, and more snow events are going to be on the table as we extend through the back half of January, going forward. So, hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video. Definitely hit the subscribe button if you hadn't already, and catch me in the next update where I protect you before and after the storm.